Michael, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're talking about fun, man. Let's have some
Yeah,
fun. You ready to have fun?
yeah, let's do this.
The fun habit. How the pursuit of joy and wonder can change your life. You and I were jamming on a few things but before we hit the record button, and a lot of really fantastic scientific things, and a lot of actually misconceptions out there of what people are doing and how they're trying to seek fun and happiness and fulfillment. I'd like to actually start with your current state. Like, so your family, what that looks like, kids, profession, the whole nine yards.
Yeah, so right now I'm taking my own advice. I'm on a bit of a sabbatical. I've worked for a company called Active Wellness the last 10 years, and we look at ways of improving population health. So that's been a good time. But I've been really focused on the book. It's been an amazing journey. It's had certain level of success, and right now it's getting translated in different languages. So that's kind of a fun ride just to see. Just found out that Poland picked up the Polish rights. So, that stuff, you know,
Man,
yeah, it's kind of fun. And so I'm enjoying that. And my kids are both thriving at sport. And so I'm really enjoying that. My daughter got into gymnastics last year. And so last year was sort of the building phase. And they kept her in, for folks that know about gymnastics, I'm still learning myself. So essentially reminding, they kept her in this class called Silver. And so she's just crushing it. And so fun. She won first place overall in Virginia Beach last week. And just getting to celebrate those wins are neat. And then my son he's 7. He just picked up basketball. So, he's got a ways to go with regards to getting good, but he really enjoys the game. And yeah, so it's neat. And I live in North Carolina. We're just finally starting to get some sun. So, just being outdoors is neat, so all the above, things are good right now, subjectively. Yeah.
that's cool, man. And so your daughter, the same one that peed on you?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, you did do your homework.
Oh yeah, I did. I did my homework, man. How long you been married for?
Since 2016. Oh, sorry, 2006. Cheating myself there a little bit. Yeah, right after business school. So, yeah, I think after a decade, you stop doing the math. I guess that's 17 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, so it's like you just kind of like go back. I don't. I'm 20 years this year, so it's really hard for me not to know that.
Yeah, you got to know the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I got the math on my side on that one. So,
And then
very
you can use that as the temporal landmark. Like I feel like when, those things like 10 or 20, then you'll know 21 and 22, and then you'll start to, yeah, so yeah, man. But 20s, that's a big deal. 2 decades together.
2 decade. Well, actually, we've known each other for 26 years. I met her in 1996 when we were in college, and man, whew, I still remember the first time I saw her. My God, and I still feel that way about her. Literally to this day, she walks in a room, and I still like. There's that part of me that and I tell her this all the time. I was like, there's still a part of me when you walk in a room, not a part of me, the whole being of me, like when she walks into a room, like I get those jitters, like I still get butterflies in my stomach. She just takes my breath away still. I know that sounds probably too good to be true, but it's absolutely true. And but hasn't come without work. But I want you to you got to share this story, man, about your daughter peeing on you and that whole thing. Every dad can relate to this to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, it sets up kind of, what I've learned a bit too about, having fun with kids. But so it's a cautionary tale. I think like, she was my first child, and like, anytime, I think most dads really want to do a great job, right? We try to stack the deck in our favor. And but there was something that I really wanted to do. It was a personal journey. I had recently lost my brother. And so long story short, there's something called the Rise Festival out in Nevada. And it's essentially a lantern release.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, yeah, it's really neat. It's got quasi kind of spiritual vibes. They put on, some really, spiritual type music, trance music. And, but it's a good time, a lot of collective effervescence and a lot of people that are trying to mourn something or sort of release something. They'll write that thing because they're paper lanterns. So they write it on the lantern, maybe well wishes to a loved one that's passed, or, if they've gone through trauma, something that they're trying to release, that's a part of it. Right. And so that was definitely part of that journey for me. Was I wanted to, kind of reminisce about my brother's life and kind of and then potentially let some of it go, or at least just release the pain. But I also wanted to bring my daughter along because she is, I guess she was a big fan of the movie Tangled, and Tangled has that big lantern scene.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
it's just fun to be with her. And then we were going to actually couple that with a trip to Yosemite, which we did, which was a lot of fun. So I dragged her out to Nevada with me and really had set the intention of what I wanted, instead of what we would do together. And so didn't show a lot of empathy. It was sort of like, hey, you can come along and have fun too. Right. And so once I got there, I was like all set up to kind of do what I wanted to do and have her as a companion. But she was a toddler, right? So what she did was toddle, and she's an extrovert. So, here I am like trying to create this experience that I had, predetermined was going to be amazing, and she was ruining it. And I should have been a better adult at the time, but I really wanted it to kind of go my way. And so the more that she was sort of engaging the people around us who all found it fun, which I think, because I was sort of had a weak ego at the time, allowed me to get even more frustrated, because I was trying to reel her in, and she was just being herself and being happy and engaging with these people that were happy to engage with her. I kind of lost sight of why we were even there, right? I was trying to turn it into a teaching moment instead of us both enjoying the experience. We finally did get the lantern off, and so that went. But as soon as we went it off, because she was 4 and it was so exciting, she's like, let's buy 3 more lanterns or whatever it was, right? Like, she's like, let's do it again, this is fun. I'm like, that's not why we're here. And I was just getting more and more frustrated, obviously, like not overboard, but holding it inside and just
Right.
frustrated. And then the whole thing, had a lot of people, so we needed to eat. I dragged her all the way to the Nevada desert. And so I was frustrated at this point, and we get in these humongous lines because there are a bunch of food trucks, to appease people that were all hungry at this point after, it's taking a couple hours to do this. And so we're waiting in line, to get our food, and maybe 3 or 4 back, I can't remember now, but, pretty close to the front of the line, maybe even second. She's like, Daddy, I gotta go pee. And I'm like, oh, after already like all this latent frustration, right? I said, those 3 magic words, just hold it. And, you've already kind of given away the punchline to my demise, like right as they're going up there to order, she just peed her pants, and I was like, oh man, I had set myself up to try and be the best dad ever because, we're going to do this amazing experience together. And because I had predetermined all these expectations and really focused on the outcome of what was supposed to happen instead of really just enjoying in the moment this amazing time with my daughter and maybe relinquishing some of the things that I wanted to happen, I essentially ruined the whole event. Right. And so I'd like to think I'm a somewhat mindful person. And in that moment, when I realized like I was really, you know, essentially not the best dad ever, but the worst dad ever in this instance, I tried to make amends. We had some okay food, so we ate it and kind of had a good laugh. I apologized, and she's a really old soul, so she accepted it and kind of understood. But we still had a 2-mile walk back to the car. So I wasn't gonna make a young one with wet clothes get chafed thighs. So I hoisted her little urine soaked body up on my shoulders.
Oh my
And
God.
the best memory of that event isn't necessarily, the lantern release, but getting soaked in my daughter's urine as we walked back to the car and had a good laugh about it.
Oh my gosh. That is, it's so interesting though. Like that story makes me reflect on my wife and I were, and actually our 2 older boys were joking. We went to, joking about this actually recently. So we went to Disney back at the end of 2020, and it's all about that expectation, right? It's like, oh my gosh, we're paying so much money to be here. And, like, it was the end of like 2020, so the masks and COVID and all this other crazy stuff. They literally, like, Disney actually like literally hired people to hold signs with masks, and their whole job was to yell at
Oh my
you as you
goodness.
walked by to make sure that it was up on your nose and all this other stuff. And before we went on this trip, we made an oath as a family and an agreement. No expectations. We're going to roll with the punches, and just enjoy what's in front of us. And that's it. That's it. Because there's all this pressure And the funny thing was, is the reason we were just talking about is because like, man, you remember when we went to Disney and we would be very observant. You could just see it on some of the parents' faces that were miserable beyond belief, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, we drained our bank account to come here. And it's, we're miserable, we're waiting in lines, we're being yelled at to don our masks properly. The kids are crabby, they're hungry. It costs, a fortune to feed people, feed your kids here, all this stuff. And this beautiful family moments and memories of going to Disney are just crushed by the expectations that we put on it and the pressures that we put on ourselves. I know that's one of the things that in your story just now, you share that, of like you had these expectations of what that experience was going to look like for you and her, and it wasn't going that way. And how many times did we do this as human beings of like, man, this experience isn't living up to my expectations, therefore it sucks, right?
Yeah.
Not having fun. Why, from a psychological standpoint, why do we do that?
Yeah, because a component of happiness or perceived happiness does have to do with anticipation, right? And so there is some neuroscience there. I don't know how deep we want to go into it, but one of the exciting things that is a component of happiness is that we now know that excitability from dopamine really is triggered by the anticipation of pleasure. And when things go wrong, that can be a big letdown. It's the reason why things like casinos work, right? And it keeps you back. The psychological term is called variable reward. It's the same reason social media works, right? You keep kind of thumbing things down and, yo, that's a funny meme. And then, oh, 3 boring memes. That's obviously a lot more pedestrian sort of example. But a lot of us have these preconceived notions of what we expect, and we don't allow ourselves to live in the moment. Instead, we do exactly what you suggested, and it's this state of evaluation. Like, this is what I hoped would have happened, and it did, so now I'm satisfied. Versus, the more it takes a little bit more deliberation, but being mindful of, what, this is a really fun thing that we're doing. And so I can find my enjoyment and my contentment in the moment, no matter what happens. Another example, I actually talk about it in the book, that is fascinating, as kind of an observer and researcher, is parents that will get annoyed that their kids are having more fun at the pool. Because, I don't know if you were in Orlando or Anaheim, but both cities have amazing hotels to kind of support, people's vacations there. And so some of these hotels are just as fun, if not more fun, for kids than the actual theme park, which requires, long lines, annoyed parents because of the cost of the food, all the things that you brought up. And you'll see parents where their kids are just, in these amazing states of elation, actually pissed off because they're like, well, why did we spend all this money? Like, why not focus on the fact that your kids are having an amazing time, irregardless? So it's just, unfortunately, one of the flaws of sort of how we were developed to perceive pleasure. And there are ways to mitigate it, but also, you should give yourself some grace, because again, there are reasons for that, right? When you look at motivational science, we're meant to get excited about things that we want to pursue. And a lot of us do want to pursue things that are fun. And the problem is, if we feel let down, then sometimes that can be contagious, right? So it doesn't only make us feel bad, but then all of a sudden, there's sort of this downward spiral as we're all sort of feeding on each other's, dismay, and then it can kind of go sideways, especially for folks, again, that lack a level of empathy, or, potentially did, make the stakes too high, right? And I want to, just a quick asterisk there. I also understand that assertion comes with a degree of privilege, right? Like, if you spent your whole life savings, because you really wanted to do something amazing for your family, that comes with some risk, that's baked in, right? Someone gets sick, and, and you're essentially looking at a very, a set of resources that you overutilize because you're really trying to do the right thing. That can have some emotional pain that's outside of the context of what you and I were just discussing. So it's more complex, but I think at a rudimentary level, that's exactly the phenomenon. We really are good at comparing and anticipating things that will happen. And when things don't go that way, oftentimes it can hurt more than it should.
That's such a easy trap for us to fall into as parents, because I think we're so, and the science better than I do, but we're so vested in the way it needs to look that at times it's impossible for us to roll with the punches of any adversity that comes our way. And then, we sometimes we just quite frankly pissed off. And
Right.
then that literally drains the enjoyment of the moment. Some of my wife and I went on a trip, and this was back in this was back in like 2000, late 2007, because my wife was very pregnant with my second born son. I found out in a rude awakening way why Hilton Head is so cheap in September, and that's because it's hurricane season. Had I
I don't,
didn't I didn't connect the dots,
good to
back
know, because we
right?
love Hilton Head, and so I
Yeah.
won't make that mistake.
Don't go in September. Not a good idea. And so we got there. I'll never forget it. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like first 2 days, my wife and I were on the beach. We're like, this is unreal. This is so cool. And then we were there for another 3 days. Well, then the last 3 days, it was not it was not a hurricane, but it was a tropical storm. And it was like a monsoon. Like I've never seen rain like this in my life. And we were like, we called the front desk and we're like, hey, what's there to do outside of, the beach and stuff like that? And they're like, everything that you possibly want to do at Hilton Head is outside. We have a bowling alley. And I'm like, we did not come to Hilton Head to bowl. So we were like, okay, gosh, I guess we make the best of this. So we drove to Charleston one day, and then we drove to Savannah, Georgia one day.
Oh my goodness,
And
that's
yeah,
about 4 hours, right?
yeah, but there was nothing else for us to do.
Yeah.
So we just drove. And we literally, like, one of the things we did is we literally walked around Savannah with an umbrella, and we went on ghost tours, and we did sightseeing, and we saw like these really old cathedrals, and um we made the best of it. And there were points we were just like, wow, this really sucks. And we would like laugh about it, but we look back on it now, and we're like, that was probably one of the coolest trips, but we just didn't realize it at the time. But we appreciate it now because of how we ebbed and flowed with it, and how we were just, we just took the adversity for what it was, and we actually did make the best of it. But I would love for you to just share, your book is actually scientifically based. There was a lot of science that went into it, a lot of research went into it. Can you just share some fun statistics as it relates to this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you want me to start. I think, unfortunately, they're not fun statistics, quote unquote, but I think what we're seeing now is level rates of burnout from folks that just really aren't enjoying themselves, right? And so, we're in a modern era, where they call it the sandwich generation, where kids are older than they ever have been with regards to, the associated age of their biological parents, and our own parents are now older, right? And so before, in previous generations, grandparents were able to help generally with child rearing, right? We weren't as nomadic as we are. And so you're finding that there are all of these headwinds, that being one of them, because I know your demographic is parents, but also, with regards to knowledge work, where, in previous eras, we kind of knew what was expected of us when work was a lot more algorithmic. And for folks that don't necessarily associate with those terms, we used to make things, and now essentially our intellect makes things, but we don't really know when to stop, because knowledge work, there aren't clear quotas like there used to be when we were making widgets, right? And so you used to exchange an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and we don't have that anymore. And so what we're seeing are statistics like, one of the facets that I study the most is physicians, and this is the worst year in there, with regards to burnout, where 63% of physicians are reporting that they're burnt out. On the leisure side, again, I talk about this in the book, but it was reaffirmed with new data. We're second to last in the developed world with regards to even giving people access to take vacations, right? At 10 days worth of PTO for 1 year's worth of work. There's one country below us, Micronesia, at 9. And what's even more telling is that even though we're getting second to last with regards to access to time outside of work, only 50% of us are taking them. And so we're really in this era where a desperate course corrective is needed, because it's clear that the fact that we're not enjoying ourselves are leading to all of these negative consequences. And it's not just psychological impact, right? I mean, these things have clear physiological impact too. When we are living a life devoid of joy, leisure, and autonomy, you see all sorts of things like cardiac events, high blood pressure, higher rates of diabetes and things of that nature. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but unfortunately, the stats are telling a really bleak story. And so often what my hope is that the same way we looked at these same statistics with regards to sleep in the 90s, remember the Gary V's of the world? I mean, you're somewhat a web entrepreneur, right? I mean, we all followed him. I did too. Because I wanted to be genuine, I still have the post up where I celebrated with him. Like, I'm going to stop watching Lost and build my empire when my kids go to sleep and grind it out till 3 a.m. Now him and everyone else that was kind of, professing that have walked it back, right? Even Gary Vee has a chief happiness officer, because we know that sleep deprivation is one of the easiest ways to grind yourself into the ground and not be productive. Now we're seeing the same statistics with regards to leisure. For folks that aren't able to create transition rituals from their working life to their home life, are the ones that don't show up the next day with the vigor and vitality to create anything, right? And it's a 1-2 punch. It's not only are they less productive, but what we found, and this research comes from a study on what's called the hedonic flexibility principle, is that not only are you not showing up with the energy to actually be productive the next day, but you don't seek out challenges. So you think in a very linear fashion. When we're worn out, right? We use, in science, we call it heuristics, but that's just a fancy way to say, step-by-step process or an algorithm, right? We're like, okay, I remember how to feed my kids and get them to school. Like, I'll just do that and everything will be okay. So we don't think outside the box, right? We don't look for creative solutions. We're just like, I can rely on, these habits that I've learned because I don't need to think about them. They don't create a cognitive load. But the people that create space within their environment, psychological safety and free time to be able to free think, are the ones that really go out and seek out harder challenges because they have the capacity to do it. So when you look at it in that context, it becomes extremely important, right? The problem is that so many of us, through social norms or whatever, it's various reasons depending on the individual, but so many of us derive our self-worth from productivity that we can trick ourselves into thinking, I'm in a mild state of discomfort, so let me just answer a bunch of random emails that don't really move my agenda forward, but it will make me feel like I worked till the end of the night. And so there's another host of research, study after study, and the ones that people might be familiar with because it just came out this week, is looking at the amazing impact of countries that are trying out 4-day work weeks in earnest. You're seeing productivity go up, you're seeing sick days go down, you're seeing general happiness go way up. So that's just, one sort of example of a more macro corpus of science that shows that when we operate under this false belief that productivity is the only thing that should garner our self-worth, that paradoxically we're not productive at all. And the reason that so many of us fall victim, and I'm certainly throwing rocks at a glass house, is that it's insidious. Like sleep, you generally know after 4 or 5 weeks of poor sleep that something wrong is happening, right? A life devoid of joy, it can be 6, 12 months, I know you talk to a lot of parents and dads. A lot of times people will be in amazing marriages, but they just forgot how to have fun together. And they look back and wonder what happened. And if they'd only sort of gotten in front of it, right? And that happens with so many other aspects of life. When we're just not enjoying things, we don't, it becomes depleting. And it becomes, what I describe as a downward spiral.
So the one that hit me, like, I mean, a lot of what you said hit me between the eyes, but measuring our self-worth on our productivity. Oh my gosh. Like I think so many, especially if you're a father, because like you're the provider, you're the protector. You always feel like you have to be on. Very rarely do I see men give themselves permission to enjoy something. Like they feel like it's the difference between a human being and a human doing. Why do we do that? Like, why are we, especially, I remember growing up and I remember my mom and whoever she was married to at the time or whoever she was dating at the time, like, because men were just sort of in and out quite a bit. But what I noticed is there was always a good time to be had. Like my mom was always having fun, or like as she worked, right? But there was a lot of fun to be had. There were a lot of partying things to done. I didn't really see her like grind out her health, right? Like in a good way, right? I didn't, and I saw a lot of leisure. But this generation, I mean, it's like the 4 a.m. club, it's like up at 4, grind it out, all day long, 18 hours a day, right? And I notice even in my own life that if I'm not doing something, number one, there's like a huge question mark. I feel like that's like right above my head. Be like, what are you doing? Why are you not utilizing this time? And also like, well, if I'm doing like, even if I'm trying to do something leisure, like watch TV and just decompress. Like I don't do that very often, but when I do, it's like, shouldn't I be doing something more productive? Why do we do that? Like, what's the psychology behind all this? You're muted.
Sorry about that. So when you saw my camera go off, I was under the impression when you hit space that it mutes, and then when I hit space, it's taking my camera out. So I don't know why it's backwards, but I apologize for that.
Sorry.
Uh, no, so it's serendipitous. Fatherly had just reached out to ask some of these questions. So they're, I don't know that I intimately knew the answers, but luckily I just dug into it. I think from the male perspective in particular, it's, in the US is that you're always kind of looking to achieve the next goal. And the only way to do that is to be productive. Yet we're still biological machines that need downtime again. And so that's why it's an interesting analogy to look at this juxtaposed to sleep, right? You need to be able to recharge the batteries. And so just like our biological system needs to be able to slow down, you need periods within your 168 hours where you're not continually cycling through your CPU, right? It's essentially like redlining your car for the full day. You need some downtime to be able to kind of slow down and process that information and actually enjoy yourself so that things can sort of work in the background to get you back to even keel. The thing is, again, because it's such a slow process of either grinding yourself down or getting yourself back up to baseline, that it's hard to actualize unless you look at it longitudinally. And so what I suggest is that you start to integrate things back into your life if you're, if you feel like that's necessary, right? Obviously you can go too far. I'm not suggesting a life of escapism where you quit your job, but a lot of us aren't even finding 2 or 3 hours out of the 168 where we can say, you know what, those are 3 hours that I just really enjoy myself. And so getting back there and then checking in with yourself and being self-aware, do I feel better? Is this really leading to me crushing the next day? And 9 out of 10 times the answer is yes. And then you can start to get back in balance, right? Like it's okay for me to watch this show because it was a deliberate choice, especially with media, because so many of us do it. So like a quick science lesson on fun. In psychology, we essentially boil it down to something called valence. And that's just a fancy word for saying we enjoy something, right? So we're either enjoying something or we're not. There's also this level of being drawn to it, right? We're generally drawn to things we like that. I think it was in the pre-interview, but the way you described your wife, right? And then there's some things that repel us that we might still need to do, but it's still things that we don't want to do all the time, right? I just had to do my taxes for my LLC. That's not something I enjoy, and it certainly repelled me. I couldn't wait for it to be over. And to suggest let's organize it so your life doesn't need to have that in it, that's an asinine assertion. That's essentially a facet of toxic positivity, right? And so you need a broad spectrum. It's clear, you're also going to have loss and change in your life, right? There are going to be things where you need the emotional flexibility to be like, hey, I talk about it in the book. I wasn't taking the time to mourn my brother's death, and there were interesting psychological consequences to it. The thing is, when we're in that negative state, oftentimes we just want to displace the discomfort. And so what we'll do is we'll channel surf or we'll get on our phone because it's not really a joyful activity or something that is truly positive valent, where we want to continue to do it. but at least it alleviates that pain. And that's what so many of us do, because if we don't have the energy to kind of be innovative about what our choices are with regards to what bring us up, we find really poor uses of quote unquote having fun, right? Like happy hours with our friends where we regret it the next day, or again, plopping on the couch and not paying attention to, you know, what we're watching. Like if I asked you a week from now, what was it that you checked out on Netflix? Oh, I don't know. You know, I was just trying to get comfortable. So I think what you triggered me to say is like watching TV, if you're like, I really enjoy this show, you know, and you're going to enrich detail because you were so engrossed in it, you were encoding, you know, the good time that you were at, you know, especially when you're watching things with partners or whatnot, you know, like right now, you know, my wife is really into, oh, come on, not Yellowstone, but what's the, with, anyways, so you can tell how much I love TV because it's not how I
Yeah.
find fun.
Right.
But because she works for Wrangler and but it's got uh anyways, I digress because again, I don't watch television. But I want to make sure I wasn't villainizing, you know, enjoying entertainment. I think there's twofold. One, if you're doing anything deliberately, but it's not in the pursuit of an outcome or productivity, it's going to allow you to be more productive within those elements. And especially if you use that as a way to time bound your work, right? Because that's just, we know that too. One of my mentors is Nir Ayal. You know, when you are really good at time blocking things, you tend to, you know, and you're deliberate about your time. Like, I'm going to get this done within this block of time because I really want to do something different with the other block of time. You tend to be better, you know, when you have those confines too. Tim Ferriss talks about this a lot. So that's all to say that when you are enjoying yourself and you're giving yourself these chances to really, you know, lack of a better term, let your hair down and recharge your batteries, you're able to show up as the best version of yourself. And when you're not doing that, then you're depleting yourself in a way that's insidious because you don't really know why it's happening. And ultimately you become less productive over time.
Yeah, because it goes right back to that burnout thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's that grind. I want to get really, really specific here.
Sure.
You know, you mentioned the word transition a couple times. I actually have a two-part question. Um, two different situations. What I would love for you to cover is, you know, doing this work now for the past 8 years, 10 years, really, working with men and me personally. One of the hardest transitions that we make is from work mode to dad mode or to family man, right? And funny story. So I want to ask the question of what are some of the best ways to make that transition that is most effective? And I just want to share a quick story as you think about that.
Yeah, please.
My oldest son and I just got back from it was all for dad edge, but he went. I love to take one of my kids with me anytime I travel for dad edge stuff, whether it's speaking or whatever else. We flew out to LA last week. So I was on John Berthal's podcast, and then
Oh,
we
nice.
flew from LA to Vegas because I was on a TV show and that kind of thing. And then we did some really fun things in between to really, you know, enhance and elevate the relationship and the one-on-one time. We had literally a blast. And my gosh, there were so many amazing memories that came out of that trip. We ended up staying one night extra to and it wasn't planned, and I won't get into the details, but not that I had a listener of the show reach out to me randomly, and he knew I was in Vegas, and he was head of entertainment for Caesars in Planet Hollywood, and he offered me and Ethan VIP tickets to see Keith Urban and a penthouse suite in Planet Hollywood all for free. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? Like,
Oh, you can't turn that down.
yeah, so we accepted, and it was great. So, but you know, we had to take a 5:30 a.m. flight the next morning. So we literally were on like 3-4 hours of sleep, you know, like, and jet lagged and tired. And so we're driving home, and you know, I looked at Ethan and I knew we were both tired. And I looked at him, I said, hey, you want me to give you like a really, really fantastic dad tip right now? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I said, well, here's the thing, you're tired, right? And he said, yeah. He's like, I'm exhausted. And I was like, so am I. I was like, and as soon as we walk in that door, your two littlest brothers, who are 7 and 9, they're going to be all over me and you, right? And probably more all over me because dad's home and, you know, they want attention. And I was like, and I'm smoked right now. I'm so tired. And there's every bit of part of me that just wants to go home. I was like, your mom and I joke about this, but there's two rules when either one of us travel. Don't come home tired, don't come home crabby, because the other person basically held up the whole house while you're
Right, right, yeah.
so we're coming home and I was like, your little brothers don't want to hear if dad's tired. They don't care that you only got 3 or 4 hours of sleep. They don't care that you're jet lagged and been on planes. They don't care that you're 2 time zones ahead of what you should be right now. They do not care. What they do care about is dad happy to be home and what is he going to do with me when he gets home? And I said, right now, I am mentally and emotionally preparing myself for that moment of how I'm going to walk in that door because every bit of me just wants to go in our bedroom and crash. Right. But I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. And I said, so I'm mentally getting myself ready for that. And I was like, and I want you to see that unfold for what it is. And I was like, and I'll be honest, as you know, sometimes I've been good at this, sometimes I've been bad at it. But I'd really like to know from your standpoint, for a person who's wrote a book on this and knows the research and the science, man, what is the best way for us to transition?
Well, it sounds like intuitively you know it. So I took this from clinical psychology because clinical psychologists have to absorb an immense amount of trauma, right? Client by client. And so they have something called a transition ritual where essentially they engage in some act of mindfulness where they clear the palate, exactly what you said you did, and for all fathers, it's going to be sort of unique to them. I've heard fathers like go to a park. For me, it's literally just turning my hat on backwards because that's my fun mode. Kind of brings me back to that frat boy state in college where I'm in bro mode and my kids like that persona that I put on. And in the fitness industry, we're allowed to wear hats. So hat on forward means business, and flipped on backwards, it means fun. For others, it's simply one of the stories I highlight in the book is putting their cell phone in a box that a fairway box where they can't bother them, right? Because they know now that's kind of a transition ritual. And so whatever gets your mindset from knowing that your work day is over and now you're in this other mode becomes extremely important, because we do live our lives in personas, right? And so oftentimes that's not as intense when we're with our family, but we can forget to take off that work mask when we go into the house. And this is especially insidious, not to overuse that word. I don't think I've ever used it that many times in podcasts, but it's problematic. Let's go with that. In the modern work culture, where a lot of us will be on work meetings as we walk into the house, right? And so I do not have the same amount of experience working specifically with fathers as you do, but the ones that I have, will ask me, like, I don't know how to get my kids off screens, but they'll be the same ones that are walking in on the phone, and so I will kind of educate them on how strong kids model other people's behaviors, especially people that they look up to. So, kind of what's going on in the house. Oh, I don't know. I walk in, I kind of finish up my call, I sit down, ask them what they're. So you're saying the first thing that they see of you, you're essentially on a screen yourself, right? And so, that's an extension of work, right? You never really know when work has stopped and when, and especially during the pandemic, this has really become problematic because so many of us were used to that just sort of being blended, right? And so we're trying to get back to it, reestablishing the social norms within the household that, like, okay, this is respected time where I'm going to be present with you, and I would ask the same. And so I guess I cue that up because a lot of folks are still trying to undo. And again, another instance where I'm throwing rocks at a glass house, where to survive, my wife and I needed digital babysitters because, we both work a lot. And so now we're undoing that conditioning slowly but surely. So it's not painful for them, right? But at the same time, now we have family time because the rituals of our life are being reestablished.
That makes total sense. I view it as, if you don't make that transition, it's kind of like when my oldest son runs track, he runs the 100 sprint. And what does he do before the sprint? He warms up. He gets his mind right. He transitions from I am a spectator and I'm on this team and I've been watching all these races to I need to now get ready for my race. and he'll do his things where he warms up and he stretches and he, practices explosive movement off of the track,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that good stuff. But we don't do that as fathers. We just waltz right in and we go in cold. But that transition point is so, so important. You mentioned also, go ahead.
I want to give a tip of the hat to Todd Herman because that's so I
Oh
knew
man,
it,
yeah.
yeah, from a clinical standpoint. But when I read about him applying it in a practical sense, for those that aren't familiar with the alter ego effect, which he talks about it in that book, he talks about a drill sergeant that just didn't realize that he was bringing his drill sergeant persona into the home. And he was like, why do my kids hate me? And so again, with fathers, I'm sure you do the same. Give yourself some grace because these things, when you've habituated behavior, it's hard to change it if you're not mindful of it. But I think if you're considerate, like something is wrong here, then with just a little bit of upfront work, you can realize this isn't the person I want to be. And oftentimes you can figure out quite quickly, like, oh my goodness, I am bringing, my work self here where my kids need a leader, yes, but they also want a dad. And so let me figure out what that means within the context of my time at home. And once you do create that transition ritual, you really can flip the switch. It tends to be a lot easier than you think, especially if you keep kind of checking in. And that self-awareness isn't something that you have to do all the time. You can dip in and out of it, right? You kind of make these subtle course corrections instead of, putting a huge burden on your shoulders. Again, it kind of goes into the whole thesis of our entire talk, right? It's like, don't be overly concerned with the outcome. Just keep steering your ship in the right direction and you'll get there. It's the people that waste too much energy in rumination rather than taking action that tend to get tripped up because that can lead to despair, right? Because a lot of, these things, the poor outcome happens slowly over time. Unfortunately, one of the truths is the positive outcome takes time too. So give yourself some grace and just celebrate the little wins. And I'm sure you see the same thing, right? It's not like you're going to change, patterns of behavior that have been established year after year within a week. But as long as you're, making progress towards it, you'll be surprised how fast it comes.
I agree, man. Yeah. I wanna ask you more about a transition, and maybe the answers are the exact same. I don't
That's
know,
fine.
but it's a bit of a different situation. So I'll just use myself as an example. Um, yes, I'm in the dad space, and yes, I've got some strengths, and I also have a tremendous amount of opportunities to grow and be better. One of those opportunities to grow and be better is like, so I love hanging out with my 17 and 15-year-old. Like we throw the football around, we do like the big boy stuff, right? When it comes to my little guys, my 9 and 7-year-old, it's like, let's do art, let's play Candyland, let's do Legos, which I like that stuff, but I find that I am not nearly as excited to do those things versus like when, if my 15-year-old is like, hey, can we go to the gym? Yeah, let's go, man. Let's go crush a workout. You want to throw a football? Yeah, man, let's go do that too. Right. And then when my little guys are like, they want to do little guy stuff, I'm like, there's a part of me, it's like, it doesn't sound like the most fun. But that's my goal isn't necessarily, am I going to have fun playing Legos? The goal is I want to hang out with them. But at the same time, it's more of an observation. I mean, I always do it despite whether I feel like doing it or not. But is there a way to transition that aspect of the things that your kids they want to do, like, and let's even take some of the guys who are like, dad, can I, the guys with daughters, dad, can I paint your nails, can we play tea party? And you're like, sure, or some guys be excited and some guys aren't. But how do you make that transition of the things that maybe don't have you so excited?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's two things that again, standing on the shoulders of giants that I think works. One is often we forget that we can co-create these experiences. So your kids have brought forth some ideas, right? And I think showing up and going, this is fun, but I also want to enjoy it. And here's some things that I like, and seeing if you can find common ground. So sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but that's a great strategy because, again, if your kids weren't having fun with their friends, right, they'd be like, let's do something else. And so many parents approach that as I have to do it, to your point, and that's subtle, right? I'm like not villainizing, but like, okay, I need to spend time with my kids. I have to do this rather than I get to do it. And so because it is a I get to do thing, can you reorganize it in a way that makes it so it's fun for both of you? Like for my son, I had a similar situation. And instead I was like, hey, let's go to the go-kart track because I love it. And he was just lit up. He's like, absolutely. And so now we go race go-karts, and it wasn't that expensive because we got a season pass, right? And so now that's doing something that we both enjoy because we've replaced the activity that I didn't find that fun. If you can't find something where you find common ground, the strategy again comes from clinical psychology, but it's really try to reframe your perspective into just seeing the enjoyment that they're having, right? So a lot of times we'll ruminate on like, I really just don't want to do this. And if you can just kind of soak in the joy that they're having so that your memories and the encoded sort of information that's going into your brain is just the joy in seeing your child having fun, then we activate these things in our brain that are fascinating called mirror neurons, especially if we have a lot of empathy, right? And so we can essentially experience the same amount of joy. So a lot of us, if we're not mindful, again, we're kind of approaching it from a sense of duty, those won't get fired, right? Because we're looking at it as a babysitting job, right? It's very transactional at that point. But if you can get in the mindset of like, oh my gosh, my kid is just loving this. And so again, you start to co-opt that experience, it can be helpful. It doesn't work all the time. And if that activity is just so monotonous, like again, this is going to be a very episodic intervention, right? Like, so if you're playing Canyonland for the 100th time and you just hate the game, like that's probably not going to work, but it can work, if you're talking about 3 or 4 different activities.
That makes total sense. I share a quick experience with you yesterday. So I was with my littlest guy, my 7-year-old. We went to his soccer game and he played in the soccer game. And it was like the very first like beautiful day we've had in St. Louis. It was like 70 degrees yesterday. And I was like, we drove past this playground on the way home. And I was like, I'm gonna go take him to that playground. And again, I'm more of the sports kind of dad. Like I like to kick the ball around, throw the football, all that good stuff. Playgrounds are okay, but it's definitely not Candyland, like where I'm like, oh, I just despise it, but it's okay. But I noticed that I had more fun. And as you were saying that, why? So my wife came home and she was like, oh, how was today? I was like, actually, I was like, it was so much fun. I was like, we had a blast at the playground. And she's like, well, what made it different? Because she knows I have fun there, but she's like, wow. She's like, well, what made this one more fun? And I was like, I was watching him, as I was chasing him, and I played on that playground with him the whole time.
That's awesome.
And what I did is I watched how everything was happening through him. Like, I was like, we were playing like the floor is lava on this one spot where you have to like balance and jump from rock to rock and then log to log and all this. And I kind of just sat back and just zoomed out from the whole situation. I was like, how does he see these big like rocks? And like the distance for him is way different from the distance for me. Like I just stretch my leg over, I just do this tiny jump and I'm there. He has to like catapult himself. And I noticed, I was like, it just felt so much more adventurous and so much more connecting. And literally 45 minutes flew, like, and we were supposed to be there for 30 minutes because we had to get home for dinner. And I look at my clock and I'm like, oh my God. I was like, we got to go. I was like, we're late. And
Isn't that the best when you enter flow like state, and you're just like,
yeah,
so a couple things there. Well, I guess just one piece of advice. And again, that's what, the interesting thing about talking about the science of fun is that fun really is unique to the individual. So anytime you give a recommendation, it's only going to hit with a certain amount of folks. But something that I found really helpful with regards to people that do feel stuck is taking a class with their child. So if they're like, we can't find common ground. So I've taken cooking classes with my kids. A lot of people have reported, anything that engages in movement. So like yoga classes. I talk openly about switching my daughter out of gymnastics early on. Now, I've already told you she's crushing it in gymnastics, but early on when it was really just an exercise of getting her out of the house, I realized I was just boring myself sitting on the bench watching her. So we ended up taking a dance class together and just made these amazing memories. There's something behind the science of getting moving with your child, as long as you're both enjoying yourselves or mastering a new skill, that can really sort of, increase not just the fun, but those rich memories that you can really use to relish, as time goes on, because those memories won't be soon forgotten, right? And it doesn't have to come from a place of privilege. Oftentimes, especially if you live in a larger community, you can find these classes for free, from your community center. So it's not like you have to go seek them out and they'll be expensive, right? Oftentimes you can find these opportunities on the weekends, accessible from all sorts of different avenues. So anyway, it's just kind of a quick tip on folks that do feel stuck, like, I just can't do this again. Why not find a class? Kids love to learn, especially if it's something where they can get messy, like cooking,
That is so true. I've noticed that shared activities are so cool. And there's one thing I definitely want to emphasize here, and that is like, so like the cooking class, right? It's like, yes, as adults, we probably know how to cook a thing or two, but I guarantee you go to the cooking class, you're going to learn how to cook things you didn't know how to cook. One thing that me and my 15-year-old are doing actually this weekend is you and I are recording. So I did not grow up hunting. Like there was not a man or, father in my life that, like, hey, let's go hunting. Never did it. And I had a grandfather that fished, but never hunted. So I know how to fish. And my 15-year-old, like, literally just got his hunting license through school. So he took a class called Outdoor Pursuits and got his hunting license. He's like, Dad, like, I really want to go hunting with you. And I've always lived by, and I've said this to my kids out loud. I may not know how to teach you everything, but I will always learn anything with you. So my son
I
comes
love
to me.
that, by the way.
Oh,
That's
thanks,
awesome.
man. But I'll tell you, man, you have to really like swallow the ego a little bit and like, sidestep the ego a little bit of like, cause like, your 15-year-old, he's like a young man at this point, and he's looking at dad like, hey, I'm a young man, I'm looking for you to guide me and lead me and teach me. And sometimes when your young man looks at you and he's like, Dad, I want to go hunting. And you're like, sorry, son, I do not have the skills nor the know-how to even teach you how to do that. We have firearms. We know how to shoot the firearms, but I have no idea how to hunt. I was like, you know what? I have no idea how to do that. I was like, let's find a place where you can show up and have no clue what you're doing. Maybe, a history of shooting firearms, and they teach you. And sure enough, we found a place and we're going this weekend. And basically, like, it's a place I'm like, all right, man, like, what's my packing list? What do I need to bring? And they're like, waterproof boots, warm clothes. Otherwise, we got it all here. Show up. And I'm like, cool. They just teach you everything. But I think that's something that, I just want to make sure most men really understand the power in that you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be the guru. You can, it's actually, I think, more connecting to be like, hey, son, I don't know how to do this. Neither do you. Actually, at this point, he knows more than I do because he's got his hunting license and I don't. But let's go learn together. Let's do it together.
And I think you'll be happy to know the science backs you up on that one too. So
Oh, really?
there's a rich um, facet of psychology called transactional analysis. And the problem is when dads are trying to teach their kid, it's not a problem. That's the wrong frame, but the actuality, right? So this is just the truth. It's not a problem. So let's be clear there. But the truth is when we're teaching our kids, there's very much this transactional psychology that happens, right? My kid's like, I want to learn from my dad. This is a teaching moment. And the dad's like, I'm a teacher. I want to bestow knowledge. There's less likely to have fun there. Not necessarily, it's not a useful endeavor or meaningful endeavor. Of course, dads need to teach their kids, right? But oftentimes it can come from the sense of duty on both sides. The child wants, when you two are taking that class together, you don't have to be the teacher. So whenever there's kind of a break or you guys are just celebrating each other's wins, you two are having a lot more fun together because you're both kind of in that childlike state where you've now essentially outsourced the teaching role to someone else, and you two can just really enjoy the pleasure of hunting together. And so you set the stage for, potentially more fun because you're not in that. I mean, how many husbands, this story is such a commonality. I tried to teach my wife to snowboard and it was like the most awful day. And then she found an instructor and picked it up the next day. Granted, there's some partners that are good at, teaching their spouses, but I feel like the majority that just always ends in terror. And so again, the science suggests that when we can learn from someone else, that the stress of, again, both teaching and learning, from this intimate relationship are gone. We're here to do something and we can both enjoy it together.
Oh my gosh, that's so I'm a science geek by nature. Like I got my degree in sports medicine with a minor in nutrition. It's a bachelor of science. So I'm always like hardcore. I'm like, show me the data, show me. And I was in medical device sales and pharmaceuticals for years before doing this full time, and everything was clinical study and data driven. So I love the fact, like I think some things obviously are subjective, but when you can back it up by actual research, it makes it that much more powerful, I think, for me, for just about anybody. But Mike, this has been awesome, man. Yeah, congratulations on your success with your book.
Thank you. I
Um,
appreciate that.
I want to make sure that the guys can find you, they can find your book. But what is the best place for men to connect with you?
So I write about the science of fun at michaelrucker.com, and the book is available everywhere. Support your local bookstore if you can, but obviously, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com. It's got a wide release, luckily. So
Awesome, man. The science of fun. Right? If I go and ask my 16-year-old, I'm like, hey man, the science of fun, he'll be like, those are two words that should not exist in the same sentence.
it's so funny you say that, because as a dad, you'll love this. My daughter is so sick of, especially because, there's been some activity, and she's like, you have certainly found a way to suck the fun out of fun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you, sweetheart. I love you
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, if you want to pick up Mike's book, like we were talking about, the science of fun, we're gonna have all of his links as well as a link for the book in the show notes. Not to worry on that one. Also, today's podcast is sponsored, like I said in the intro, by First Form. $75 free shipping off all orders, $75. All orders over 150, they throw in a free t-shirt as well. I'll have the link in there for you as well. Firstform.com/dad edge. Mike, thank you so much for coming on today's podcast. It was awesome having you and learning about the science of fun, man.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. Gentlemen, go out, live fun, live legendary. Just kidding. Go out and live legendary fun. Take care.